There's a world you're living in. No one else has your part. All God's children in the wind, take it in and blow hard. Neil Young's song, There's a World, is a key inspiration for our ongoing series of heartfelt conversations with folks from all walks of life. We're diving in and exploring their practice, their process, and how they express their unique genius to help create a more compassionate, wise, and present world. This is your part. Welcome back to Language of the Soul, Conversations on Healing and Growth. I'm Ben Umstead.
And I'm Martin Perkins.
And our guest today is Rory Turner. Professor at Goucher College, Rory designed, launched, and continues to teach Masters of the Arts program in cultural sustainability. Rory also founded and subsequently revived the Baltimore Rhythm Festival. Welcome to the podcast, Rory.
Thank you, Ben. And Marty, hi.
Welcome. Rory was kind enough to share the rich writing that he's created over the years as his role in the academic world as an anthropologist. And he wrote a piece titled Communitas and Practice in the Baltimore Rhythm Festival. And there's a particular quote that he quotes his father, Victor Turner, from 1995, in which it starts out, "It involves the whole man in his relation to other whole men." And then you go on to say, "It is a space where an existential sweet spot is invited between the boredom and anxiety, bridging difference, safe yet subjunctive, abundant in giving, receiving, gratitude, recognition, generous in negative capability. It is a day when the structural divides and violence of my city, Baltimore, are at least figuratively healed for a moment." In that writing, as I read the words whole man in his relation to other whole men, I'm curious, well, number one, what hold you in your heart as to what your father was speaking to, and how does that speak to your experience within the community and the experience of Communitas within the festival itself?
Yeah, my father was a person that had a kind of extraordinary and creative ways of sharing insight into culture and human experience. And one of his most enduring ideas was this idea of communitas. What he was, I think, getting at was that much of the conduct of human affairs takes place within structures of status and hierarchy, within these kinds of defined roles that we play in relationship to one another as man and woman, as employer, employee, as members of different identity communities, as old and young, and so forth. There's all of these different ways that we make assumptions about each other. We need to do so because it almost becomes unbearable or very difficult to live with a kind of unvarnished freshness of encounter. You know, we bring our projections into the world and we act accordingly, and we need to, because those projections have an origin, and that origin exists within these systems of power that shape the way our world is shaped. And he said, and I think somewhat courageously at the time in the context he was working in, he said that there was something else going on with human beings. And he saw this in the ritual encounters he was privileged to witness in Zambia in the 1950s. He saw that in these moments of initiation, of celebration, of other kinds of rites of passages, that people were connecting in this way that was not this partial kind of politically self-interested way that they were actually seeing each other and appreciating each other and sharing a kind of ground of being that is often obscured by the agendas that we hold as we interact with one another. In being educated and gifted with this by the Ndembu people he worked with, he shared the idea, and it was an idea that many people recognized in their own lives and also in the kinds of cultural actions and moments that they experienced as anthropologists and beyond. And so, this term communitas, this sort of feeling of encounter, we have to reckon with it. It's actually, in some ways, at the basis of many religious traditions. It's at the basis of social movements and revitalization movements. It's in the basis, I think, of the 1960s, a lot of the kinds of countercultural activity that took place there. And, there's much to be said about it. In that passage, I was actually kind of riffing on the idea in ways that were referencing or kind of gesturing towards aspects of this. There's a sense of flow in these states. There's a sense of both security and also possibility. So safe yet subjunctive, the idea of the subjunctive case, that we can talk about things that are not yet, that might be, that could be. And that this leads towards ideas of futures, leads towards ideas of renewal and of creativity. And this is something that I've really worked on more, that this is a space for the flow of gifts, that, in the logic of gifts, and thinking of the work of Lewis Hyde in particular, has very much inspired me in this thinking that the logic of gifts is very different than the logic of commerce. It's a logic of exchange that's about an increase, the creation of bonds of connection, and in so doing, the creation of communities of mutual care and support. And, it is the case that if we actually are able to do the work, to be able to see the beauty and the kind of impeccable rightness of all people and even beyond people, then we want to care rather than to compete. And so, this idea was something that really, I think, flowed into me. This idea of communitas flowed into me as the child of my father, and sort of informed some of the academic work I've done. It also informed this idea of the Baltimore Rhythm Festival. It's the topic of the book chapter that quote comes from.
And, you touch on that notion of gift versus commerce, not versus, but in relation to commerce. And you spoke earlier of the notion of projections. And I think of projections in many ways as unconscious bias, right? And then I think of people like Ibram X. Kendi when he speaks of being that, we all have bias. And he speaks of being in the context of a particular type of bias, racism. He speaks of it as, the only way to consciously be with racism, regardless of our background, is to be what he calls an anti-racist. And I love this idea that as you speak of communitas, it really speaks to when you go to that safe yet subjunctive place, projections fall away. So in many ways, communitas is this doorway into really feeling into a space where we can be in ourselves deeper with the bias. Does that resonate?
Well, yeah, it absolutely relates. And I have played around with a concept I call radical critical empathy to try to describe that. The proposition here is that we can hold one another with the kind of same recognition that we have of our own humanity. And that there's something radical about that. And I mean radical almost in the sense of, the root of that word, the root of radical is roots, is the kind of deep, almost sometimes molecular, certainly, in terms of like mind and history, in intertwining and entanglements of sharing presence with another person. and then creating a common ground and doing that through sharing experiences, which is really important, I think, in cultural work. It's not just about learning about other cultures. It's about that kind of the mark, the trace of loving the other people, loving other people. But it has to be critical. It has to, it's like we are all beset and burdened by the kinds of brainwashing, one could say, perhaps, or the ways our consciousness has been shaped by the languages we use, by the discourses we've been exposed to, by the kind of unwilling, unconscious biases that are generated by the ways our minds work.
Orientation, right?
Yeah, yeah, and so we can't, it's like the way to move beyond both things like racism is to there's a process of education, I think, that we need to learn something about how the world got to be the way it is, which is why I feel like I've been privileged to be able to help open up that space for people as a teacher in a department of anthropology and sociology. We need to have both a radical and a critical empathy, and I think there can also be a kind of empathy that is sort of sentimental and oblivious to the power differentials and the positions that we inhabit in relationship to each other. I think there's a question of humility. There's a question of, creating different kinds of partnerships in cultural work. And that's been part of, my path with the Rhythm Festival. And, having an event that has at the heart of it, the idea of drumming, the idea of drumming together really does relate to, some really kind of deeply held and cherished ideas of culture that are, racialized. And, it's like the cultural politics of this is, it's a thing. Should white people be playing African drums? And how should they be doing it? And then why is that not necessarily a bad thing? Those are things that I'm interested in, but also to be very, very careful that it's not, a person coming into a community and, sort of asserting control over that community from outside. These are important considerations. And so I've been very, very blessed to have amazing partners that I've worked with who, are Black folks from Baltimore, Menez and Ebony Yehuda. It's like a mom and pop operation. And then I'm like the kind of crazy uncle. We're very, very kind of transparent and honest about how we go about doing things. And we share power and authority and listen to each other. It's been one of the most remarkable collaborations of my life to work with those two. So yeah, I don't think we're going to move beyond the racism that has really infected and shaped our society and is a kind of feature of the global landscape without really inviting people to have these experiences of communitas with one another. As one might say, getting over ourselves, getting over those parts of ourselves to like a deeper existential experience that is not just an individual one, an I-thou experience, as Martin Buber would say.
So when you speak in this way, and because we're friends and we have our own history, I know that, you first came to drumming 40 years ago. So I know you had a passion around drumming. So when we talk about in the context of this podcast, how do you arrive at your part? On some level, you arrive to it through an existing passion. So like your passion around drumming ultimately led to, well, frankly, the call to lead in that community because the passion was there. To some degree, it's not really about, yes, it's about African drumming, but it's about community and supporting that community as a mode of passion itself. It's not, oh, I want to control or I want to take over or I want to lead this. It's in many ways, I like to use the phrasing leading from behind. Often our part in joining any existing community is like, how do I support? How do I feed, nourish? We can have the light shine on us. The light shines because of innately who we are and not whether or not we're getting attention. And I love how, over the years, I've had the good fortune of witnessing your leadership style. And I have to say that I've had nothing but admiration.
Thank you for that. I mean, but I think it's always a challenge, right? And in that quote that you shared at the beginning, one of the phrases that I sort of identify with Communitas is in this space of the Rhythm Festival. Say it's generous in negative capability, and that idea of negative capability is referring to it was a term that the poet Keats used, and it was really about the idea of creating space within which agency and participation could be possible. It's rather than directing, it's inviting. And so, this is, I think, what has been my philosophy. Now, but I mean, there's two things here. One is sort of freedom, and the other is the creation of the space within which freedom can be exercised. And there is where, I have to say, I haven't always succeeded. It's a different kind of structure than the structure that's become normal in, educational processes in the United States and other kinds of things, where there is a real kind of privileging or prioritization of creating very tightly woven structures through which people can learn things. But I'm always like, maybe there's ways where we can let people have their own ways of sharing their gifts rather than just receiving what's coming from the outside. I'm influenced by people like Paulo Freire in thinking about this and ideas of adult education. So, the question of like, what is my part? And the question of like, why do I even do this? It's like, you mentioned that I have this love and passion. It's like, why was this the thing that really got into me? And I've thought about that a lot. Drumming together, and it's not just African drumming. It's a whole range of things where people connect in sharing and creating these kinds of rhythmic spaces that it quickens us and it connects us. And it sort of intensifies our relationship to what? Time? To this sort of the cosmic constant assemblage that creates the coherent field within which we are possible. I mean, that's a kind of cool thing. If we can really get connected to that. It's obviously not the only way that people connect to that real sort of fundamental ground of being. I mean, I think of meditation. I think of singing together. I think of the act of creativity. I think, the whole man that, my father's referring to is one that is, existing within this creation, not just existing as a social being or as a, psychological wanter of things or, any of those other hats or masks that we wear. So, yeah, I would say, it's more like, and this is a term that's come up for me recently, we play a part, but I almost feel like we are a portion of something greater that we are part of fundamentally. And as being part of that fundamentally, there's something like utterly delightful about that. I mean, it's almost, I think it helps deal a little bit with things like fear of death. It's like we're part of it.
Hi, everyone. If you've been enjoying our podcast, please consider visiting martinperkins.com for more healing and growth resources. Over there, you can check out the Language of the Soul 1-year course, the paperback and audiobook editions of Language of the Soul, A Path of Simplicity. And you can also sign up for our newsletter, which is full of heartfelt essays, news, and events. The new 3-part workshop, Building Resilience in a Changing World, is now available on Martin's YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/@Language of the Soul. That is an @ Language of the Soul. As burgeoning podcasters, the greatest gift you can offer Martin and I is to share this podcast with just one person. Word of mouth remains the most genuine way to share the art and media that you love and care about. So in advance, we thank you. And now, back to the conversation.
In my book, I talk about, I have a chapter in which I touch upon a little bit of your work and your father's work in a chapter I title Stories of the Sacred. And for me, being a teacher, I would offer a consciousness teacher if you give me, if there's to be a label to be put to what I do. And in doing so, so much of my notion of communitas has occurred in nature. And it's not separate from, it's just simply a different sense of who the community is, right? And a broadening, as you speak of or as you just used. I love the word you use because I use the word in a completely different sense. And I loved your definition. You used the word quickening, and I took it to mean a quickening of attention and intention into the moment, right?
Yep.
And often I use the word quickening as a reflection of the world we live in as a kind of really opposing force, which is the quickening of life itself. I see it all the time where there's people not in the quickening you speak of, but existing in the other quickening of just being so up here in their heads and so anxious or worried or whatever that they really, there's no spaces that they know how to access that will allow them to move into the other quickening.
It's so fascinating to me to hear both of these ways of approaching the quickening, because in this sense, I actually go, it's one and the same thing. It's just we're either conscious and intentional with it, present to it, or we're not. So the quickening is all of this stuff, busy, busy, busy. Got to go from here, here, here. Technology is pushing me unconsciously. Or the quickening is, aha, yes, I know, I trust, and things move effortlessly, right? This one singular thing kind of break out of a binary space, even by kind of declaring it as one and the same. It's just, again, to kind of draw back to biases and perceptions, not what really are we doing, how are we engaging with it?
Absolutely. That's perfect. And, when again, in that quote, there's this space between boredom and anxiety, it's like, well, there are things that don't really engage us. We have boredom. If there are things which are, sort of insurmountably complicated or demanding, the experience, the how is an experience of anxiety. It's like how can we be at peace? How can we be serene in relationship to a world which is so hyper? And then there's flow, right? And that's the thing, when you're playing drums with people. And what I love about playing drums with people is that it's like there is something bigger, that you're a portion of what is unfolding, but you're also, what's possible for you is only made possible because of contributions of others. We are co-creating something. And there's an intimacy to that, and a kind of directness and a sharing that goes beyond or beneath words. When there's a groove, when it really comes together, there's flow, and there's almost like a thing of like it becomes to some extent effortless. But it's an effortlessness that is founded upon practice. You're not like sort of consciously thinking, well, this would be a really cool place to do like an offbeat phrasing. You're not sort of rationally kind of like scheming it. It's just like, that's the right thing. Then that adds a whole nother spice to it. This is a metaphor my friend Menez uses. A good rhythm is like a good tasty food. It's got just the right level of spice. It's salty enough. It's got balance and all of that. So yeah, I love the way you're kind of helping us think it through Ben, with looking at that, and this is relating to, these sort of fundamental questions of our time is like, how can we make peace with a world that is being shaped by advances that we are seemingly sort of, they're being inflicted upon us in some ways as human beings, and they're making demands on who we are. And I think that's incredibly challenging. And, one of the kinds of corollaries of that is distraction. There's just so much that the distractions sort of supplant the simplicity, kind of core wisdoms that is really needed to be present, and then to be present with one another. I don't know. I must feel like weeping, It's like I see it. It's like, oh my God, this is at the festival when I just see, this sort of people lighting up, and especially for kids, it's like I feel like this event and there are, it's not singular in this, but it's like it's almost striking a note, like a sacred bell in the spirit of my city, of like, here's how we could be with each other. We could really be recognizing each other's gifts and valuing them. We could be seeing how we make each other possible. We could be seeing how crazy beautiful we can be.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you speak of flow, as you put it earlier, and you've given all these rich examples, I'm, anyone who's done a class with me or been in an acupuncture session or has read my book, so much of the emphasis around this notion of flow is very much internally driven, right? And you're giving all these incredible examples of how this flow exists in social connection, right? And I just want to celebrate what you're sharing here because it's such a juxtaposition to my own internal experience of like, when you're describing flow, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that when I was young and I was swimming, or flow when I was like running, or like all these sort of solitary activities that I would do when I would feel that sense of internal flow, right? And then when I started meditating, or time, incredible experiences in nature, and often interactive, but at the same time, often no one else human is around. And I just love that, we can speak of these things in every context of the human experience and know that flow exists.
That flow, it's so simple in that, because you talk about your version of it. We were on the phone the other day, right? You and I, and we were talking about trust. And you said, "Hey, Ben, I'm sorry, I don't mean to sound if I'm not present," because you hadn't spoken in a moment. "I'm having this incredible experience with a barn owl." And I went, "Well, that's fantastic. Yeah, we can talk about solitary experiences or social experiences with others, other beings, right? That's a really great example."
I've got goosebumps a bit, hearing you guys talk about this, and sort of reference another thought here. I think there's something really powerful in the interrelationship of stories and the generation of things like this radical critical empathy, and especially, when we're telling stories that are disclosures of our own experiences. It's as if we are kind of letting the other person into how we, as these whole beings underneath and with everything that's assembled in who we are, we're letting others into that. And so Marty's telling you a story, really just saying, I'm with this barn owl. And then you're sharing that. And then, this is like this little gift. It's a little gift of something that is speaking to flow. But I mean, the thing with stories is that they can let us into, and disclose the whole range of, sort of human experiences, both for good and for bad. It could be of falling in love. It could be of, newness, and could be of healing. It could be of recovery. It could be of all of these different kinds of things. But we start to kind of knit things together.
I love how you brought storytelling into the conversation, because I think so much of the healing and growth of life is largely defined by the inner stories we tell ourselves, right? So many years ago, Rory and I were in a series of classes together, but one class that I'm going to raise, it was a class titled Bodhisattva. I don't know the full title of the class, but it was offered by Jessica Dibb at the Inspiration Community, right? And we were, at one point or another, we each were supposed to do a presentation on healing modalities. And I chose storytelling. And it very much felt like I was like this baby who was just learning the very basics of what storytelling meant. And it really feels like the last, I don't know how many years, it's been 16, 17, 18 years or longer since I did that presentation, maybe 20 even. And how much the practice of storytelling has served me. It's yes, the intention is to serve in as a storyteller in sharing what you're offering, but just the act of cultivating and practicing over and over again, the act of creation in that sense has been such a life expanding experience for me that I just wanted to share that, both as a fledgling storyteller, even, and I still feel like a fledgling storyteller, and I'm in my 60s. Like I'm hoping I can continue to cultivate that gift until my last breath.
What I'm reminded of in this is something that I was thinking about earlier too. I've been very influenced by a book called The Human Condition by a woman named Hannah Arendt, who most people know of her through her really important work around totalitarianism and around particularly the Eichmann trial and her really thoughtful, powerful analysis of the banality of evil. But Hannah Arendt in The Human Condition has this extraordinary chapter on what she calls action. And she says, the thing about human beings is that we are all the same, and yet we are all distinct. Ben, Martin, me, we all genetically and historically, psychologically, these different kinds of orientations on the world, but there'll never be another one. There'll never be another Marty Perkins story with all of it. And the same thing for me, the same thing for Ben. And very often in life, that is something that is kind of suppressed. It doesn't necessarily articulate with the challenges of, modern large-scale societies. But then you have people like Elon Musk, right, who are able to take, his distinct kind of genius, his quality, and act in the world in ways that transform the world. What I would like to say is that we all have this capacity for action, and it is a disclosure of who we are in the world. And Arendt really draws from the Greeks quite a lot. And one of the things that she says is that, the Greeks had this idea of the daemon, that each of us in some, real way have, as it were, a spiritual counterpart, an energy, an essence that is our distinctiveness. But she says the thing that the Greeks remind us of is that we can't often see that ourselves. She says, it's as if it's like it's over our shoulder behind us, but others can see it. And if we are able to recognize one another, then we can become in some sense mirrors to one another of what that is and help a person understand what is their part to play, and I think action is the way that we play a part by fathoming what that is and then having the courage to do the things that it is leading us to. And it's a dreadful responsibility because we don't know what the consequences of that will always be. And we may hurt other people. We may not be able to meet up with the promises that we would like to make in the world. And this is why Arendt, who was a Jew, points to Jesus and the kind of great wisdom of the idea of forgiveness. And what she says is, the nature of the human condition is, whatever we experience in this world, in 150 years or, name a time, in the future, we're all going to be worm food. We become the soil of what is to be, and there will be new life. It's the principle of natality. And in a sense, that itself is the forgiveness. whatever horrors may be incurred from what we do, the play continues. And so maybe we can have the courage to act. What I would like to add to Arendt is there's something very kind of individualistic and almost like it's about the hero. It's like, Rory Turner's going to like express himself in the world in some way or another, despite all of my flaws, which I'm, as Marty knows, like profoundly and kind of often pathologically aware of. I have been able to do some things, and as you guys have, but we've had the courage to go ahead and do that. But the thing which I would like to add to Arendt is it's really important, I think, to also open up our hearts, our recognition. It's not just, an expression of me. It's an expression of something that's flowing through me. It's an expression of gifts and of these almost larger wholes that we're part of. And so then we're taking action on behalf of something. And, that's an idea that I relate to the idea of sustainability. And, there's a lot to say about sustainability and its misuse as a concept and so forth. But it's like, to what are we bowing down to? And if we are bowing down to the ecology of our little strip of life on this round sphere, if we're bowing down to the unspeakable value of human beings and their beauty and their deservingness, their lovability, that's some pretty cool action. More of that, and let's do the best we can. And maybe the ways that we do that is through some of that kind of the movement from habit to practice, the movement from unconscious action to the kind of intentionality that I think is part of the work that you guys are doing, that has inspired me. And I try to, as best I can, keep coming back to that.
Rory, truly the eloquence that you bring to the conversation, the way that you understand how to weave, how to sew, to bring that tapestry of interpersonal and personal and cosmic and natural energy to everything is really inspiring. And having the opportunity to share with such an eloquent, brilliant soul as yourself. So thank you.
Appreciate it very much. I appreciate you guys. Let's just do what we can, humbly, courageously, with forgiveness, with grace, and with as much discernment as we can bring to try to minimize the ways that we cause suffering and maximize the ways that we cause growth and healing and joy.
To read some of Rory's academic work, you can go to researchgate.net and look for Rory Turner. For more information on the Baltimore Rhythm Festival, you can visit baltimorerhythmfestival.org. Language of the Soul, Conversations on Healing and Growth is produced by Ben Umstead and Martin Perkins, with editing and music by Ben Umstead.